and copy down your essay topic. It's written right up here. Go ahead and copy this down.
This is our fourth journal.
Yes, ma'am. This is number 4. Okay, reform movements in the United States sought to expand democratic ideals. Assess the validity of this statement with specific reference to the years 1825 and 50. That's our question that we're trying to address, that we are going to address. Everybody has a copy of the notes. And what we're going to do is we are going to refer to boxes 1 through 10 when we discuss and prepare and pre-write for this essay. Those are the boxes we're going to be looking at. Yes, ma'am.
Remember our essays, the questions have to be in pen or can they be in pencil?
The question can be in pencil. Okay. Okay, so one of the things that we've talked about with these essay topics that is a big challenge is that it asks you more than you sometimes realize it's asking you. It's a bigger question than it appears to be. And sometimes we have to put together 2 different ideas to answer the question. So in this essay question, it asks us about reform movements, and then it asks us how these reform movements expanded something called democratic ideals. So we have 2 tasks in preparing for this essay. First, we have to figure out what they mean by democratic ideals, and second of all, we have to look at the reform movements, put everything together, and decide how the reform movements created democratic ideas and which ones did that and how they did it. So it's a lot more than it looks like sometimes. So here we go. So I like to use lists. Y'all know I like to use a lot of lists when I get ready to write. It helps me get my thoughts out and prepare to get my essay organized. So the first thing I'm going to do is list out, we're going to talk about reform movements. And we're going to refer to our notes, boxes 1 through 10, and we'll list those out. And then the next thing we're going to talk about, our second list, of course, is going to be about those democratic ideals. Okay. All right. So we got our list, our notes here. You guys are going to look at this, and we're going to start to discuss and mention those reform movements and make our lists. Okay, here we go. Look at box 2. Great Awakening. It all started with that Great Awakening. Very nice. Okay.
Second. Yeah.
The second Great Awakening. Thank you, thank you. Thank you for clarifying. All right. What caused the second Great Awakening?
A movement away from the church. Like the Age of Reformation.
Exactly, a movement away from the church. We got some religions that are becoming popular, and it creates yet another movement away from the church. So if you look in box number 2, you should see some of those religions.
Deism and Unitarians.
There you go. So deism and Unitarianism. So during this time in history, we have what we know as the Age of Reason. And this is a time when people are questioning ideas, and they're questioning religion, and they're looking for proof of ideas, and science is becoming more and more important and valuable in people's lives and how they try and make sense of the world. Science is becoming very important. Religion is being challenged in a sense. So deism is a religious idea that God is like a clockmaker. He set the world up. He created it. He made the clock. He set it up. He set it into motion. He wound the clock. And then he walked away. He doesn't interfere with people's daily lives. Instead, he just sits back and watches things go on. Thomas Jefferson, some of our founding fathers were deists. And this was how they saw the supreme being. That was their perception of that supreme being. Okay? So, if you were a Puritan who had been really brought up with this strict idea about religion and God and reading the Bible, how would you feel about deism?
You wouldn't feel awful.
You wouldn't feel very good about it, right? You would think that it maybe challenged your belief system. And you would want to get people back on track to the right way of thinking. Okay? Unitarianism. It's another faith that comes about during this time. And as Hayden says it, it's kind of a falling away of the faith that the Puritans know. The Second Great Awakening starts in New England just like the first one. Okay? So, does anybody know anything about the Unitarians? It's in the notes box.
They focused on the good in every man
Okay,
and liberalized the church.
yes, they thought God was good and benevolent. And what did they think about Jesus?
That the Holy Trinity was just like one of the...
Exactly. They didn't really believe that Jesus was, they didn't believe in the Holy Trinity. They didn't believe in the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost.
It was just one.
It was just one God. Okay. God doesn't punish. That was their philosophy. He's benevolent. Not angry. Okay. So many Puritans looked at these two faiths and they thought, wow, we really need to get people back on track. And so for the second time, we have another Great Awakening, a revival movement. And we have these traveling preachers that go around preaching about what's wrong with the world and how we can improve it. And they really thought that they could make the world a better place. Okay? So let's talk about preachers. Names of preachers.
Cartwright.
Yes. Cartwright. Peter Cartwright. Charles Grandison. I believe so. Okay. All right. These preachers went around, they traveled around and preached to people about the problems in the world and what's wrong with the world and how to get back where people should be religiously. Yes, ma'am?
Are the preachers under the Great Awakening? Are they with that?
Yes, these preachers are the preachers of the Second Great Awakening. I'm trying to make it, make these a little different, show you it's underneath. Okay, now, so out of the Second Great Awakening, we have the rise of the Reform movements. When these preachers stand up and they say, you know, here's what's wrong with the world. People drinking. People holding slaves. It's making the world evil and bad. We have to change things. They literally stood up there and they preached on these issues, on issues of morality.
Church camps.
Yes, at those revival camps. Very good. At those tent meetings. That's what they did. So out of this Second Great Awakening, we have the Reform movements. This is one of the effects.
Like prohibition type things.
Okay. Now, in box 2, you will see a list of Reform movements that came straight out of the Great Awakening, and let's make a list of those. Y'all know how I love my lists. In the bold.
Prison reform.
Prison reform. What else?
Temperance.
Temperance. What else? Keep going.
Women.
women's movement, and finally,
Slavery.
abolition. Yes. Let's put women's rights. Let's make it more clear. Another one that comes out of this that's not on your list, I'm sorry to say, is education. Okay. So, these are some of the reform movements that came right out of the Second Great Awakening.
Mormons. The Canadian spoons, you know. True fact.
Okay. Now, this is where it gets a little bit messy. So what I'm going to do just for the short term, since I get a little bit short on space, let me move this over. I'm going to move this over a little, okay?
Oh yeah.
Just not spoons. How do they eat soup? With their hands.
And I'll put banana bread, guys.
They probably
Okay, so now we're going to make lists
and then drink. You know about judges?
of our reforms, reformers, reform societies. We're going to start with prison reform. Which lady was all about the prison reform?
Oh, I have that written down. I don't know where I wrote it down.
So what we're doing here, guys, let me get you back where you need to be, is we're going to find the person who advocated prison reform.
Dorothy Dix.
Yes, Dorothea Dix. Yes. She is our prison reform lady, and there's a story all about her. And which box did you find that in, Charity?
I found it on my notes.
You found it on your notes. You're so good. Box 7. Thank you. Dorothea Dix traveled 600,000 miles in 8 years, writing reports about insane asylums and prisons. She was very motivated, and she was planning on doing something about it. Okay? Now, let's go on to temperance. Reformers.
I don't remember his name, but like the main law of
Neil
Neil Dow, that's his name. Neil Dow. He founds a society called the He's called
American Temperance Society.
yes, he's called the father of prohibition. American Temperance Society. Okay, this is all in box number 8. There are other people who are involved in the temperance battle besides Neil Dow. He's one of the first ones, so we'll underline him. Okay, there's another group that forms from the American Temperance Society. Do y'all see it down there in box 8?
Coldwater Army.
The Coldwater Army. They even got little kids involved with they could join up with the Coldwater Army, which attempted to get people to stop drinking. Okay. What else? A writer. Or a book, sorry.
10 Nights in a Bar Room and What I Saw There.
Yeah, 10 Nights in a Bar Room and What I Saw There. By the way, this one is free on Kindle. You can download this for free and read it. I've got it on my Kindle, and I started reading it. I haven't read the whole thing. But the very first part, the guy literally, he's at a bar, and he's telling what he sees. And the people coming in, and talks about the 9-year-old boy that's running the bar. Yes, the children that are in the bar, and all types of things that go on in there. And also he describes some of the people in the bar and the problems that they've had based on their alcoholism. All right. So we got prison reform, Dorothea Dix, temperance, lots of people involved in that. Okay, the next one is women's rights.
Mix up like.
How about some names?
Susan B. Anthony.
Susan B. Anthony. Okay, other names?
Rosa Parks.
Oh, you're too short. Box number 9.
Stanton.
Stanton, and I'm just going to use last names, guys, because I'm running out of space. Mott, lady named Lucretia Mott. Okay, these women are involved in the abolitionist movement, and there's kind of a funny story about them. Not funny, ha-ha, but kind of funny in the terms of strange that gets them really propelled towards women's rights. They go to London to the World Anti-Slavery Convention. Susan B. Anthony goes there, and she wants to make a speech, and she's denied the right to stand up and make a speech solely because she's female. She's very shocked that they will not let her give a speech because she's female, and she begins from that point to work on women's rights, and they go forward and they hold their convention called the Seneca Falls Convention, which called for equality and the vote. Okay? And women challenged traditional roles in other ways and traditional behaviors in other ways in box 9.
And went to factories and stuff.
They did that. But let's look at some of the things they did besides working in those factories. The factory work does help change perceptions, though. Because women were seen as weak and not able to do hard work and not able to do men's work. And that changed when women got in the factories and showed that they could do the work, that they were mentally tough and physically tough. So that broke down some ideas about women. How about traditional roles that were challenged in other ways?
Elizabeth Blackwell graduated from medical college.
Right, we got a lady named Elizabeth Blackwell who graduated from medical college. She got a medical degree.
Bloomer wore short skirts.
Yes, Miss Bloomer wore those shorter skirts. All right, give me another one. One more down there. Stone, Lucy Stone. What did she do?
She kept her last name.
She kept her last name when she got married. Okay, so these are all ways that women attempt to assert themselves. They try to assert themselves and give people the information to prove that women are strong, that they are capable of going to school and getting high degrees, medical degrees, that they are able to make decisions about their bodies, that they can control, if nothing else, they control the clothes they put on their body, and they can also control the name that they call themselves by. So they don't seem like really big things, but in society at this time, this was a big deal to not take your husband's name when you got married. Some people still think it's a big deal. All right. Slavery. Go back and we'll have to do this now. Let's talk about slavery. Abolition.
Everyone is interested.
Not everyone. Okay, so abolition is the fight to end slavery, and as I said, there is a world anti-slavery convention. I'm not sure if I put that in your notes here. Is it down there?
No, I didn't see it.
It's not in the book, oddly enough. I thought that was kind of something that should have been in there. It was an omission. 1850. 1840. No, 1840 or 50. Got it in my other notes where I wrote it down. So, there are more meetings and more people having conversations about slavery and what needs to happen. It is 1840. Okay, so can we name some abolitionists?
Emerson.
Emerson was an abolitionist. He sure was.
Frederick
Ralph Waldo
Douglass.
Emerson. Okay, who else?
Frederick Douglass.
Frederick Douglass. What did he do?
all kinds of stuff.
Okay, what things did he write? Because most of the information comes through writing at this time. Y'all know? He wrote his autobiography. He had a newspaper. Y'all know the name of his newspaper? How did the slaves find their way to freedom?
The Underground Railroad.
And when they're out walking at night, what guides them north?
The Drinking Gourd.
Wow.
The North
The
Star.
North Star, that was the name of his newspaper. Good.
Yeah, it was on the Drinking Gourd.
Okay.
Yeah.
Other abolitionists, William Lloyd Garrison. He's a founder of the first. Oh, it's been a long day. Thank you, Terry. He helps found the American Anti-Slavery Society. Okay?
The guy who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin.
So what?
The guy who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin.
That's Harriet Beecher Stowe. We're a little early for her. One I like to bring up is a guy named Elijah P. Lovejoy. He printed a newspaper. His printing press was destroyed 4 times. The 4th time he was killed by an angry mob. And most of your women's rights reformers are also abolitionists. Lucretia Mott was an abolitionist. Susan B. Anthony. Sojourner Truth. Yesterday I was practicing this essay and it was challenging because of the amount of information. The amount of information in this essay is staggering. Okay, education. Almost at the end. Yay. Horace Mann. He wanted to make a lot of changes in education, and those are listed on your notes. Another person who is involved in education reform is a guy named Noah Webster. And you probably recognize that name, Webster's Dictionary. So he was involved with textbook writing. And there is a third one. His name is, I always have trouble with it, McGuffey. Also was a textbook writer. Why do people wish to educate the masses all of a sudden? What has happened to the vote?
More people can vote, so you don't want stupid people voting.
Yes, the vote is the stimulus.
Amen.
Because now we have universal manhood suffrage for white males.
Universal white males.
For white males, universal manhood suffrage, that means every man can vote if he is of a certain age. And that means that you don't have to own property, you don't have to have a certain education. So some of the wealthier people said, wow, we need to make sure everybody's informed and educated so that they're good voters and make good decisions. Okay. All right, so there you go. Those are all our reformers that are in our notes. Now, it's a lot of information. And what you end up with, though, is realizing after I made my list, I realized, okay, that's only part of what they're asking me.
The democratic ideals.
Yes, they're always also asking me, how did these reforms promote democratic ideals? So now I've got to get back to that part of the question and try to figure out and establish what in the world does that mean.
Great.
Okay. So that's the next thing we're going to talk about, and then we're going to synthesize and put it all together, talk about how to organize it. So I'm going to erase this part because I'm out of space. All right. democratic ideals.
Oh.
Let's talk about those. What in the world do we mean by democratic ideals? Stuff that we hold dear in
Our rights and
America.
freedom.
Huh?
Rights and freedoms,
Yeah, we have freedoms.
and further the idea of
What kind of freedoms?
speech.
Life,
Liberty.
liberty, pursuit of happiness. Happiness. And then we also have rights, civil rights. We believe every person has rights that can't be taken away, like the right to vote,
And their rights.
to bear arms, to do many things, right to a fair trial, to a jury of your peers, to resist illegal search and seizure. All these rights that are guaranteed to you.
To drink alcohol.
To do lots of things if you're of age. Yes, you have to be of age. Okay, so what else? What else should governments do for us?
Educate us.
Should educate us. There's a whole list of things that are in one of our preambles that they should promote the general welfare, establish justice, ensure the blessings of liberty. A government is supposed to make our lives good. It's supposed to give us a good life and help us achieve the good life. So I like the expression promote the general welfare. Make life better. All right, so now you got it. I got it? Okay, so now we have our reforms. We have prison reform. We're going to see which of these reforms fits in with this. Do these reforms, prison reform, temperance, women's rights, abolition, education reform, do they promote democratic ideals, and how? That's what they're asking you to tell them. It's hard, isn't it? Okay, so let's think about it. Prison reform. Which one of these democratic ideals does this go with?
General welfare.
I would say general welfare, right? So I'm going to make just out to the side, I'm just going to write some it's prison reform. That's what I think. So check, we got it. How about temperance?
General welfare.
I would say general welfare too. You're on fire over there, Charity.
Very general.
Women's rights.
Civil rights.
Very good. Women's rights, civil rights. Women's rights, civil rights. Okay, and now we're up to abolition.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Kind of like that, yeah. You think?
Those that kind of takes away like liberty and pursuit of happiness.
Yeah, very, very good. All right. Education.
Would be general welfare or civil
General welfare. Okay. Are those all our reforms? Okay, so that's how it all goes together. When we take the AP exam and we have our actual writing test, you have a writing test and you have a multiple choice test that has some short answer questions. You have 2 essays. One of them is document based. This is not document based. This is like the long essay. You get about 45 minutes to write this thing. Okay. That's why we must practice these in class, because the only way that we'll be able to generate this information quickly, and we know it's going to be on certain topics, right, is to practice it, and practice it over and over again until we've got the information in our minds. Because this is pretty hard to synthesize in a short amount of time. I mean, I spent a long time on it yesterday putting it together. Okay. So now that you have an idea of how these particular reform movements promote democratic ideals, I want to ask you now, do we have any reform movements that don't fit into this category? That they're not on the board? Any in the chapter, in chapter 15, any other reform movements that don't fit in? Okay. not necessarily science, but other
Well,
organizations.
No,
Maybe
civilizations that they like, yeah, those little towns they
Yes.
made.
Okay, so your utopian groups, they don't really, I mean, they're trying to reform life and make it better, and they're moving away, but they don't really promote democracy or democratic ideals. Why?
Because they're all by themselves.
They're all by themselves. They're selfish.
They say you can only
Okay.
do it if you join this. Basically.
Right. So I like to draw lines sometimes and remind myself there's some exceptions to this, and we have utopian societies. And can y'all name some of the utopian societies?
The Shakers.
Oh, the Shakers.
The new home.
Yeah, you're
The
right.
Movers and the New Harmony. They had New Harmony, didn't they?
Brook Farms.
Brook Farm. One more.
What the name of it? What is it? The one with the O.
Oneida.
Oh,
Yes.
you go.
And the Mormons did move away. That's right. They are by themselves. I can't. Sometimes I forget about them.
They ran away from.
Yeah. The book calls them communists.
Oh, I know.
It
Gosh.
Set up more than 40 communities of a cooperative, communistic, or communitarian nature.
I'm telling you, that was rather harsh, I thought.
Oh, like you just.
They can't use.
Okay, other societies that kind of jumped out at me were the American Peace Society. This one is a little bit ahead of its time. William Ladd. Not really about democracy. It's a little bit before its time. It's going to become really important later on, around the time of the First World War. Okay, alrighty, so now we got a sense of how our reforms fit in. Now, now we're going to come up with the assertion, and I'm going to have to put things in paragraphs. So everybody got this far? I'm about to erase it. So if you're taking pictures, take them now. I can move out of the way. I really can. All right, you beautiful people. Okay, so did you follow my process? Did y'all kind of follow how I did that? I took the two parts of the question, I made my list, and then I tried to put the information together, synthesize it, and then now I've got to create an assertion that's going to create our subtopics that we can write from.
So the paragraphs will be the democratic ideals and talk about the reforms.
That's how I did mine. Is I did my subtopics for my assertion with my democratic ideas. Okay.
And you'll just have one for the exceptions.
Yes, that's it. Okay, so here we go. Let's get an assertion written. Show y'all how to organize this thing. All right. Alrighty. I'm gonna leave that right there. I think I can for just a minute.
Paperweight.
All right. So, assertion. Here's something that I want you to grow a little bit with. We've been doing our assertions a certain way, and I've been talking about how you can use the question to turn it around and create an assertion. Okay. What we are going to do from here on out is do our absolute best to reword the assertion so that it does not repeat the question. Okay, I know I did tell you to do that at first, and that was an easy way, kind of a quick, easy way for y'all to get started. But now I'm asking you to grow a little bit more as a writer and start to use different wording that shows that you understand what the prompt is. Okay, so we've kind of talked about how, as we go forward, we're getting a little more into tweaking your essay writing so you're better at it all the time. Right? Yes! Okay, so here we go. Assess the validity. This is how I start out. I like to start out with an even though. I like to use my transitions sometimes to get me started. Those transition phrases your English teachers teach you about. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Give me an example. However, next, although, finally, first, your English teachers would be so proud. In fact, I'm going to show them this video later.
What video?
You're recording it.
One that I'm making right now.
Government records everything.
Okay, so I like to start out with an even though.
Even though.
Even though
Stop.
all
I said one word.
reform movements
Even though it's 2 words.
from 1825 to 50 did not directly establish is not the best word I ever came up with, but that's the one I got right now. Maybe we'll think of a better one later.
Not promote.
Promote is probably better. Thank you, Hayden. You are the best.
Salvo and Coke.
Stop.
I told you.
And now we need our comma. Don't forget your comma right there. Big comma. Woo! Okay.
It's too big. Can't handle that.
Several reform movements. And this is where we get into that 2 to 3 part thesis or assertion. Occurred which did attempt, this is the longest assertion ever, create a better life for people, create a more democratic society through education. My arm's starting to get tired. And extend civil rights to minority groups. Okay, fantastic. All right, so there your assertion is, and I left some space because I'm going to write some stuff underneath this and kind of guide you through your paragraphs. Okay, so it's a really long assertion, but that's okay because it helps us get our subtopics in here so that now we got our paragraphs decided, whether you realize it or not. And these are our democratic ideals. And I changed it a little bit. As you can see, I changed it a little bit. And I did that for the purposes of paragraphing. It made sense to me to change it a little bit. So sometimes when you get to writing, you may realize, oops, I should have done that a little better. But don't get too stressed out on the AP exam. You're not going to have time to go back and fix it. You're writing in pen anyway.
Is the whole test, or in the whole test, we're gonna have to use pen?
In the essay test, not on the multiple choice. Okay, so the first thing I was going to talk about, so this is my assertion, and then the very first subtopic is creating a better life for people. So I'm going to jump right into that after my assertion. That'll be part of my first paragraph right here. This is my number one, still part of my number one paragraph. And what reforms did we say we were going to talk a whole lot about? Creating a better life. What did we say creates a better life? Which reform movements? Abolition. Y'all wrote them down, don't know.
Prohibition.
Prohibition, abolition,
Prison reform.
prison reform. Nice, nicely done. Be sure though, before you jump off into this, you tell me that the Great Awakening caused this, right?
Oh, yeah.
You're going to spend a little time telling me about the Great Awakening. This is the part where people have trouble.
So, like, could we start, like, with our very first paragraph start out, like, us telling you what the second Great Awakening was?
Yes, after your assertion, here's what I wrote. I said, the reform movement of the early 1800s began with the Second Great Awakening. So be sure that after this, you're gonna. So I'm actually gonna write this down here so y'all don't forget it because I know students have trouble with this. I will tell you, okay, now don't forget this special information you need to add in, and then everybody forgets it. So I jumped in right here, same paragraph and everything. The reform movement of the 1800s began with the Second Great Awakening. And then what would I talk about then?
Effects that came from the
Right, you would talk about causes and then effects. So what caused it? What things did we say caused it?
Moving away from the faith.
The age of reason.
The Age of Reason and those new religions called
Unitarianism
And-
and deism.
deism. There you go. So you're going to talk a little bit about causes. And then, as Taylor says, then we go and then we talk a little bit about effects. And the effects are, they said life needs to be better. And this is where you jump into the Great Awakening preachers talked about how to make the world a better place. In fact, in your notes, it says something like they thought they could perfect the world. Wow. That's pretty ambitious. So then, after you get done telling me all about causes and effects of the Great Awakening, you jump in and you say, these preachers thought that they could create a better life for people. And others joined the fight through reform movements like
The
prison reform and
slavery.
abolition and
Prohibition.
prohibition. There you go. So there you go. You keep going with your point. And this is the part that we struggle the most with sometimes as writers. Because guys, I wrote this essay out. My first paragraph is really long. I mean, it's really long. By the time I get done telling you all about Great Awakening causes and effects, and then I jump into reform movements, I've written a lot, and I'm getting tired. And one of the things that I see sometimes on your essays is y'all have essay fatigue. Y'all get in the middle of the essay and you're just like, when is this going to be over? I know, I get tired too. Stay with your plan. Stay with your thesis. And so after you tell me all about causes and effects, you would say other people joined up with the preachers in the reform movements. And then you would talk about, what are they again? Prohibition or temperance. They didn't really call it prohibition yet. Let's call it temperance. Abolition. And prison reform. And you're going to give me the names and the groups and the people and all the stuff you know about. Does that make sense?
That's a lot.
Ooh, it's a lot, isn't it?
Wait, we really talk about the Unitarianism and all this.
Causes and effects. Unitarianism and deism are some of the causes that people were falling away from the faith, and that caused the preachers to lead the revival. And in the course of their preaching, they begin to talk about making a better world.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay, so then you're done with that paragraph, right? That was all in one paragraph. Big old long, huge paragraph, about, I don't know, 15 sentences. Long paragraph.
Wait, so we talked about the temperance and the abolition and prison reform all in the first.
Yes, ma'am. That's how I did it.
Okay.
That's how I organized it.
Okay.
Then you jump into next thing. We're going to create a more democratic society, aren't we? Next paragraph, paragraph number 2, and we're going to talk about what reform movement? Education, right? Obvious. So you'll tell me all about educators and education reformers like Horace Mann, McGuffey, Webster. Okay? And even in your book it tells you they tried and they push it forward a little bit, but education is still pretty awful at the time. They tell us that. It's limited. They did a good job, but it was limited, right? You can only go so far with people without taxes. Yeah, I mean, we're dealing with that now, currently. You can only go so far with education reform without money. Money limits us as a society. If we're not going to put the money into education, we really can only go so far. All right. So second paragraph is all about reform movements also attempted to create a more democratic society. In English, do your teachers sometimes talk about how your topic sentence must relate back to the parts of your thesis? Do y'all get that sometimes?
Yes.
You don't get that in English? Sometimes you do?
I
So in your second paragraph, you should have a sentence something like reform movements also attempted. And then you go back to the second part of your thesis and you catch it to create a better life or create a more democratic society through education. And then you go into your specific ways of how people did that. You got Horace Mann, and he wanted to do A, B, and C. And then you got Noah Webster, and he tried to do A, B, and C. Those types of things. And then you might say they did make a lot of changes, but the education is still very limited due to the fact that we can't tax. Okay? Third paragraph. We're going to extend civil rights. And what reform movements? Women's rights. You could also talk a little bit about abolition if you want to. It depends on how much you did here. But you might make a little note about abolition here, about how we were going wanting to free the slaves.
Are you getting kind of wrong with the downs?
Depends on how much you do here. Okay? To me, it makes sense to return to it. I think your essay is stronger if you return to it and you talk about the civil rights we wanted to give the African Americans, that we wanted to give them the vote. We wanted to let them be free, or maybe not so much the vote, but we did want to free them at first. Some people aren't going as far enough as wanting to give the vote yet. All right, so. And then, like I said, go back on your third paragraph. Be sure you restate your third part of your thesis. Other reformers work to extend civil rights to minority groups. Okay? So this would be like, this is paragraph 2, right? And then you got blah, 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 your support. And we talked about that. Then paragraph 3, you do, is it? Other reformers sought to extend civil rights to minority groups. Now, and then you'll talk about women's rights and abolition. Now, when I got ready to end my essay, guys, when I got ready to end my essay, I actually went back to my thesis and I talked about how some of these reform movements really didn't promote the democratic ideals. And why did I have to do that? Because I said it, you bet, and I gotta go back and say something about it. So I actually wrote a 4th paragraph where I talked about how some reform movements like which reform movements am I talking about? Yeah, the utopian movements, okay? So I went back and I said, some reform movements did little. This will be your conclusion or your last paragraph. And then I would talk about maybe the utopian societies. I would talk about my utopias and maybe the American Peace Society. Now tell me, these reform groups, they're real important. They started something that shows up later in government, in laws. Let's think about that. At the end of this essay, you should think about what is the big effect for the future. This is another thing we're kind of growing with, and I'm trying to get y'all to think more about and put in your essay. What are the future effects of these reform movements? Do these reform movements just die out and there's never any change?
It created a more liberal and democratic society.
It did. And can we talk about laws that changed?
Like the voting laws.
The voting laws changed, yes. We have several amendments that come from these reform movements. Several amendments.
The
13th, free the slaves. 14th, made them citizens. 15, gave them the right to vote. 19 gave women the right to vote.
The prohibition was
20. Yes. Okay, so within these reform movements, we have these major changes in our laws. We have the temperance movement results in the in prohibition amendments, right? One that makes alcohol sales illegal, one that gives it back. It didn't quite work out, but they did get it through. I mean, it's a miracle that they ever got passed, I think. Women's rights, we do get the right to vote, ladies, amendment number 19. And abolition movement, it is finally successful, even though the civil rights era has to go on to get full equality, or more full equality, I'll put it that way. 13, 14, 15. Okay. We're still working on this education issue. Still working on this one a little bit. So at the end of your essay, you might say, these reform movements are very important because, why?
They affected our society.
Yeah,
Their impacts can
and-
still be felt on the American citizens.
Yes, the effects through the passage of several
Amendment.
amendments. We passed a ton of legislation. Passed a lot of laws that started right here in the 1820s. Okay? So think about the future effects and the future impact of these things. And I know when you're sitting here and we're on 18, 20, and 50, it's hard for you guys to think forward and know, well, what amendments are they? You know, that we haven't got there yet. But you know that, you know, we did have emancipation, we did get the right to vote, and you can talk about that. You don't have to know the actual numbers of the amendments, but you could just say the slaves were free, they got their right to vote, they were made citizens, women got the right to vote. Okay? All right, so it's a little more clear. Are we good? Woo! All right, so
You're the best.
you're welcome.
Thank you.
All right, so do Wednesday.
Stealing.
This one.
Yes, dear.